guys, and welcome to another Lost Bits video right here on TetraBitGaming, the series where we explore video game content that goes unused, altered, or normally unseen. I honestly can't believe how long it's been since the original Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games were released. From doing the Pokemon personality test, to meeting Team Hydro, to recruiting numerous legendaries and beyond, I have a lot of very fond memories with this game. And now, I'm very excited to re-experience those mid-2000s memories in the upcoming remake for the Nintendo Switch. So, in celebration of Pokemon Mystery Dungeon DX being soon released, I think it's as good a time as ever to dive into the originals here. Anyways guys, this game has a lot of different unused stuff to cover, so it's time to party like we're in a monster house and find some lost bits. Alright, so first things first, as you may know, the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games were released in two versions, Red and Blue Rescue Teams for the Game Boy Advance and DS respectively. These games are more or less the same technically and share many bits of unused content, but if there is something specific to a certain version, I'll be sure to point it out. Anyways, let's kick things off with some unused graphics. First are normally unused tile sets for various dungeon styles. There's these early versions for the Pitfall Valley and Purity Forest tile sets. Then there's a differently colored version of Waterfall Ponds tile set, potentially meant for Southern Cavern. And lastly, there's this unused foresty tile set. Interestingly, all of these would go on to be used in the Explorers sequels, except for this one, which did make it into those games, but still remains unused. Also, I did say these are normally unused tile sets because these two are actually used in some normally inaccessible dungeons in this game, but we'll get back to that in a bit. Next up is the entirety of the title background for Red Rescue Team. While this is technically used, the bottom part here is normally obstructed, so that part is never seen. Then we got some unused animations for Munchlax. Look at him, such a happy little fart. Then there's these item sprites here, seen in all the item color palettes, and some unused animations of a Pokemon's shadow on water. Then, as far as scrapped placeholder graphics go, we got this 4 HP indicator, which is a placeholder for the text graphic that pops up either when an attack is missed, or health is lost, or recovered. Then there are these story progress badges, this unused text icon, this Japanese writing graphic found only in Red Rescue Team, which translates to around this area. And finally, there's this early mock-up of the language selection menu, again only found in Red Rescue Team, and this time only in the European version. The bottom Japanese text is actually the first row of characters from the Japanese hiragana alphabet. We got A, I, U, E, and O. And next, let's get to some unused audio files. For unused sound effects, there's an alternate sound effect for evolving, as well as a track that plays 4 different sound effects, only the third of which is ever normally heard. Based on the file name, Orugoru, which is Japanese for music box, it is speculated that this jingle was very likely meant to be used when using the music box item, which normally doesn't produce any sort of sound and gets destroyed upon use. Then, as far as unused music goes, there's one named Event Zukoke, which translates from Japanese to acting stupid or foolish, and then there's System Training. Just simply based off their names, these were apparently meant for some sort of training area or menu, and some sort of scene where some Pokemon probably does something dumb. Anyways, these songs absolutely slap, my dudes, so here's a quick sample of both. Enjoy! There are also 2 tracks in each color of Rescue Team that don't produce any sort of sound when played. These are titled Dummy and Save_1. Based on the dummy file name, it was obviously some sort of placeholder, but I'm not too sure exactly what the save_1 could have been, besides maybe a sound that would play when saving the game. Now, I'm feeling like some unused items. There are actually quite a few here, so in the interest of time, I'll just fire through them pretty quickly. There's the nothing placeholder item that defaults to an Oranberry sprite, which, you guessed it, does absolutely nothing. Rings D, E, and F, which don't have a known function. Alert specs, a held item that would prevent a Pokemon from having a held item snatched, which is pretty stupid now that I think about it. I mean, you'd be preventing an item from getting snatched that prevents an item from getting snatched. That's just a long-winded way of saying it basically does nothing. Then there are TMs for Excavate and Spin Slash, which we'll come back to later. The Observe Orb, which basically pauses a target in place. The Possess Orb, which would have had you sacrifice an adjacent ally to heal the leader. Kinda morbid, I can see why this wasn't used. Then there's the Reviver Orb, which, as the name suggests, would just instantly revive the Pokemon holding it if it faints. The Toss Orb would force the user to show the item throw animation. The Beat Up Orb, which would just warp all allies to the leader, just like the Beat Up move. G-Machine 6, 7, 8, and Mime Jr. and the Weavile figure all just have the same effect as the Link Box. And lastly is the Switch Box, which I think is a fantastic item as it lets you switch the rescue team's leader mid-dungeon. That's miles better than having to back out, go to the friend area, swap, do all that fun stuff. Yeah, major headache. Next up, time to talk about some unused Pokemon? Well, unused as in you can't ever play as them, fight them, or recruit them. And yeah, some of them aren't even actual Pokemon either. These can all be loaded in as the player's character with various cheat codes. Anyways, for these normally unobtainable Pokemon, first is Munchlax, who although is seen in the game, is never recruitable. Then there's Rayquaza, who can be recruited, but this version is a special one which has certain animations that are only used in the story cutscenes. Then diving into the weird zone, there's Decoy, the substitute doll graphic used for the decoy status ailment. Just look at this happy, jumpy boy. And then Statue, the Kangaskhan statue graphic that is normally used for the save points before entering a dungeon. The statue has absolutely zero animation, so it just looks super awkward, and due to a glitch, it also appears blacked out after entering a dungeon. For the last two, surprisingly, there are even stat values and types associated with each. Like the substitute doll is labeled as a slacker Pokemon like Slackoth and is Steel type, while Statue labeled as a coal Pokemon like Torkoal is water type? Yeah, I don't know. Whether these were intended to be other Gen 4 Pokemon or something completely different is anyone's guess. And then, even weirder still, is an unused Pokemon with its name just being a bunch of question marks, but for brevity, let's call him Q. It is labeled as an Eruption Pokemon, probably taken from Camerupt. It is a normal type and has a recruit chance of -999. Yeah, good luck with that one. And unlike the other unused Pokemon I mentioned so far, Q isn't ever obtainable, as when trying to load Q in, the game will just simply crash. As such, the prominent theory is that Q was just a placeholder of some sort, but who knows? Interestingly, Q also has some unique dialogue text strings that also obviously go unused. These include something, this is getting tough when dropping to less than half health, I can't go on when dropping below a quarter health, and I leveled up, I'm happy, when leveling up. Again, whether these are just more placeholder text strings or there's something more to this is currently unknown, so you get to be the judge. Oh, and don't worry, there's more unused text strings coming up later for you epic fans of unused text strings, all 5 of you. Anyways, up next is data for several map coordinate points that are either normally unused or used in-game, but normally never selectable on the map. Here is a comparison of all the used coordinates with a mock-up image of those that aren't. Interestingly, for the locations that are used but aren't accessible directly from the base, the points are actually visible briefly on the top screen in Blue Rescue Team during cutscenes after certain boss fights, if the top screen is set to show the map. Alright fellas, the moment some of you have been waiting for, unused text strings. So in addition to the text strings of the unused Q Pokemon we already discussed, there's also a failsafe text string which just reads unregistered dialogue script, which appears to be a debug string to be called if no dialogue script is set. Then there's invalidity, which I assume had a similar role, I guess instead for menus. Then found right after invalidity is undefined, obviously for undefined strings. And lastly, this, which translates to nameless, and this is apparently a placeholder text string for a friend area. And with that fun stuff done, now time for some unused moves. Now here there are some moves that aren't actually selectable, like the basic attack that's used by pressing the A button, or moves that are activated by orbs. All of these moves, despite not being selectable, contain unseen data for their type, PP use, and in some cases even a description. For example, the basic attack actually only has 17 PP programmed, but obviously it's set that you can use it an unlimited amount of times. Then there are the moves that are truly and completely unused. These moves are Excavate, which has the same effect as Rock Smash, Spin Slash, which has the same effect as Cut, and Famish, which would have decreased the belly room of all enemies in the same room by 10. Just like we discussed Excavate and Spin Slash earlier, it is also believed that Famish is a scrapped orb effect too. Additionally, there's also scrap data left over for several moves with unknown effects. Almost all of the descriptions just say reserved, suggesting that they are just blank spots that never got filled, but then there's also the move named Who? With an unknown effect and no description, the move Wait and See with the same description, and a blank move with the in-game description just being inflicts damage on the target. Yeah, very profound description. I am pretty curious as to what the Wait and See move might have been though. Both versions of this Pokemon Mystery Dungeon actually have a debug menu, but don't get too excited, it's not really the most impressive one we've come across here on Lost Bits. Basically, by fiddling with some hex values or using this action replay code with Red Rescue Team, the delete save data option on the main menu will now instead lead to a new sub-menu. Now, although all of these options may seem promising, unfortunately the first 5 options will just make the menu disappear before the game locks up. Storage will do the same, but without the menu disappearing, and H-Open will just return you back to the main menu. It's very unfortunate that a debug menu with what looked like so much potential just turned out to be Game Crashing Simulator 2005. But despite this small setback, worry not, for I have saved what I think is the best for last. So next, let's dive into this game's unused dungeons, and luckily there's a whopping 12 of them. First is a dungeon simply known as Boss 3, and it goes from being a marshy-like area to a rocky one and then to a grasslands one, and it's filled only with Poliwags and cast forms. There's no boss here, so I'm not really sure why it's named as it is. Then there's Boss 4, which takes place in an ice cave terrain, this time with many more different Pokemon to be seen, but again, no boss. Then Boss 9 is 12 floors of only Shuppets in a desert oasis, and again, no boss. But one thing I found strange here is I was brought to just a massive room with no maze elements. Not sure if it's completely unused, but I can't say I've ever seen this before. Then Wondrous Sea is again 12 floors of just Shuppet, this time in the labyrinth zone-like area. And just like the last dungeon, it seems like I always get dropped into an area with just a ton of Shuppets. Howdy fellas, how do you do? Then D50, D51, D54, and D61 are more not so noteworthy dungeons, this time with more Pokemon than just Shuppets. But of those, a few things I did find out of the ordinary is that with D50, the amount of steps or moves you can take here seems to be much lower before you get banished, and D61 appears to maybe have been some sort of weather test area, as each floor has its weather completely randomized. And now finally, something more noteworthy. First is a dungeon called Autopilot. Just as the name suggests, this dungeon is basically an autopilot of your characters entering a room, seeing nobody is there, and then leaving onto the next room. I can only assume this was to test A, how this sequence would play out, and B, to test loading various different biomes. Next is a dungeon listed as Dojo Registration, and this groups all of the mazes from the Makuita Dojo into a single dungeon with, get this, actual boss battles every 3 floors up until floor, you guessed it, 69, in which the game will crash. Then there's Fantasy Strait, which despite sharing the name of a dungeon area that is used, here it is completely different. And lastly is a dungeon simply known as Rescue Team 2. Nothing too crazy here, it's just 3 floors of pretty weak Pokemon. Then, not an unused dungeon, but there is another unused room known as the Provisional Map Room. The game mistakenly lists this room as the Makuita Dojo when you bring up the menu screen, but a dojo this is certainly not. The collision is also kinda funky here, as you can just freely walk all over the table, but you can't walk up these stairs here. At the bottom of the map, you can also see the Japanese text spelling out Provisional Map. And as you've probably noticed, there are also 2 NPCs here. Both of them seem to not have been given much thought, as when interacted with, both will just spit out the unregistered dialogue script string, it's hard to say, I went over earlier. And to add even more fuel to the flame of mystery here, the background music is also the same from the Makuita Dojo, and leaving this area will spawn you outside of the dojo as well. And now for the final stop of this video, saving what I think is the best for last, is a very large, normally inaccessible debug test room. If you've been around the channel for a while now, you know I love me some fresh new test rooms. Before we get to the Pokemon here, first stop on this tour, you'll notice that overall the background graphics look much simpler as they don't have as much detail or shading. Most of the graphics here are unused anywhere else in the game, including the trees, the buildings, and more. Unfortunately, the buildings don't lead anywhere as no warp points are programmed in this level. Alright, back to the area with the Pokemon, getting the not so special stuff out of the way first. These 2 mailboxes function just like the team mailbox and the mission board respectively. Then the first 2 Pelipers here, the Gulpin, Kecleons, Wigglytuff, Kangaskhan, and Persian, all just act as they normally do in the Pokemon Square area. Now onto the Pokemon that act out of the ordinary. First, back at the Pelipers, the 3rd one here appears not to do anything. That is until you interact with him for the 10th time, after which the game will soft lock. I guess he's had enough of our shenanigans. Not including myself here, there's not 1, but 2 Blastoise here, which I love to see. The first will just spit out the unregistered dialogue script string, while the second one has a bit more to show us. He gives you the option of choosing between 4 effects. The first causes a glitchy, unused explosion to pop up, the second effect does seemingly nothing, the third shows us some sort of steam effect or something before the game soft locks, great, and lastly, the final effect is an earthquake animation, a very violent one at that. Pretty cool, Blastoise, thank you. Then right by this second Blastoise, Golem here just parrots the unregistered dialogue script string, but in the Japanese version, he has a bit more to say. Instead, there he says other stuff like, alright, I'll give you the ... that the player has peered into a barrel, that the player has found a blast seed, and finally, he will say to come back after a while. Will do, pal. In the same vein, there's the Octillery here that I guess for some sort of testing reason has the paper animation from this cutscene in the game playing constantly. Octillery 2 will just say the notorious unregistered dialogue string in the international versions, but in the Japanese version, this Octillery instead contains what is apparently a list of overworld non-dungeon locations. Selecting them doesn't seem to do anything, but maybe at one point this was some sort of debug feature to warp to those locations, perhaps. And speaking of warping to locations, next up is Azumarill, who does just that. When interacted with, the screen will go dark, and you are instructed that this is the event test Pokemon. Here you can basically warp to any main cutscene in the game, and depending on the cutscene, it can lead you right to the corresponding dungeon. And this is pretty handy to get to certain parts in the game quickly. Then similarly, Wartortle here does basically the same thing, but with the side mission cutscenes instead. Here you have to be careful though, as some options will result in just a black screen soft lock. Or this will happen at the end of a cutscene, whatever this is. And for the last stop of this tour of the debug room is Jirachi here, who, interestingly enough, acts like the luminous cave in which you have to go to evolve in the game. And as a bonus, when interacted with, the music will also change to the luminous cave theme. Overall, some of the functions and how they're accessed here really reminds me of the debug room we saw back in the Mario Golf Lost Bits video. In any case, pretty pleased with this test room, a lot of cool features here, and it's nice that it's in an unused area to boot. And with that, my friends, we can check another awesome debug room off the Lost Bits list. And there you have it, all the noteworthy Lost Bits from Pokemon Mystery... Damn it! Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red and Blue Rescue Team, and I hope you enjoyed. If you did, consider dropping a like down below, and also be sure to check out some of my other Lost Bits, like the one I made on the main series Gen 2 games by clicking or tapping on the card right here. Be sure to subscribe here for future videos, swing by my other social media things, which are all linked below, and if you want to support the channel, check out my merch over at TetraBitGaming.com, or consider becoming the latest member of the Bit Club. Click on the join button below for more information. Anyways guys, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in a bit.